that would be within the scope of the governing body, i.e. the wisdom of the project itself. You know, assumption is that the building authority has no independent authority to go out and buy anything. That's strictly within the purview of the city. So I just kind of wanted to make sure we didn't get, I mean, anytime you have a 4-3 vote on something, that folks think, well, here comes the second bite of the apple. You know, I think from the wording of the statute itself, you know, we clearly have plenary authority or that equal to a governing body as it relates to the bonding component of it. I don't see where the building commission from the statute itself derives co-equal authority with respect to the decision as to wisdom of the project to begin with itself. So I don't know if you've had experience in trying to parse those differences of authority. But,
does it happen that the building commission will go against?
Building commission, I understand the point, and there's no question, you're right. Probably.
right. But
No, I understand. I do.
When it gets 6 o'clock, so, I mean, I think it's, yeah, you can go ahead and call it.
All right. Do I get to do this?
Yes.
It was great to be elected to this. I campaigned hard, and I'm glad I got elected to this to chair the Oak Hill Building Commission. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Where basically everyone knows why we're here. We're here to discuss the purchase of the former BB&T building. I know we got, so that this is the first reading. We've got John Stump here. He's going to answer a few questions for us that we had at the last meeting before we go any farther. And I think one question I was asked coming in here, I know we have a few more, but is a meeting like this open to public comment?
Technically, no meeting is required to have public comment. Western Government Proceedings Act does not require, unless your ordinances provide otherwise, does not require public comment at a meeting unless it's a public hearing, advertised public hearing. Okay. Today is not a public hearing, it's for consideration of first reading. If any city councils have public comment at every meeting, but it's not required. Now, if you do it as a matter of course, the city council does continue that, but you're not a city council board. You're not required to have public comment, and that's been actually ruled on by Ethics Act, or excuse me, Western Ethics Commission Committee on the Open Government Proceedings Act. So you're not required to have public comment, and there will be a public hearing prior to the third reading. And at that public hearing, that's the purpose, to take any comments that anybody can have, and certainly any member of the public is welcome to submit comments in writing at any point. As far as having public comment, no legal obligation.
Okay. And I think
It's really up.
and anything that probably would come up was probably brought up Monday at the council meeting, I would think. Okay. Bill, I know you had a couple questions.
yeah, and again, I mow grass, paint, grow tomatoes, and now I serve on the Oak Hill Building Commission. So this is kind of a work in progress here. But, you know, one of the things that I always attempt to do anytime you're appointed to or serve on a board, commission, or any other type of public body, it's I consider it a pretty high level fiduciary responsibility that you take seriously and, try to study up and learn as much as you can. And believe you me, from what I've read in the last few days, municipal bonding authority is not normally within the scope of any reasonable citizen who tries to go about their life and not get into the weeds. It's a pretty complex matter for laypersons to just sit down and absorb. So I did a little bit of work in preparation for this, trying to frame my questions properly. And in our first meeting, it became evident to me that the first thing I need to understand is, what is within the scope of my duties and responsibilities, what is and what is not within the scope of the authority of a building commission. And as I was able to determine, Chapter 8, Article 33, Section 4 of the West Virginia Code enumerates what are considered to be the powers of a building commission organized and appointed by a city government, and some of which are self-explanatory and some aren't quite as clear to me. So I guess the question in terms of duties and responsibilities, clearly building commissions deal with the bonding and financing component of what are referred to as public works projects, of which obviously a city hall building would be a public project within the scope and meaning of that statute. And it appears to me that what is referred to as the governmental body in this instance would be the popularly elected members of the Oak Hill City Council, which, in some instances may have concurrent authority, overlapping authority, preemptive authority. That's what I'm trying to get clear in my mind is, where do the duties of this building commission begin and end with respect to this particular project. And from my reading, it's very, very clear. And I guess you don't travel with the code in your pocket, but there is a section of the code that seems to give the building commission a little higher level authority as that of the governing body, whereas the other powers do not carry with it. I assume if you're qualifying one power as being that of a governing body, you can assume, absent reference to that term, the rest are not as prominent as that of the governing body. But the section J, which relates to funds, it says it being hereby expressly provided that for the purposes of the issuance and sale of revenue bonds, each commission is a governing body, as that term is used in 816.1, et cetera, of this code. So that's the one carve out I see that leads me to believe that that's sort of the hierarchy of authorities. I guess you don't get much higher than that of a governing body. But again, that relates only to matters relating to the issuance and sale of revenue bonds, not the other kind of substantive elements you get into. I mean, obviously in a project with a 4-3 vote by a council, there's some diversity of opinion as to the wisdom or lack of wisdom of this project, or any of the other things that go into making a decision as to whether to buy a building for municipal government purposes. What I'm trying to decide is that a matter that is to be rehashed and acted upon within the statutory purview of this building commission, or is our scope and authority and piece in this process? And I assume the intent is to work in concert and cooperation with the city council, not at cross purposes or in opposition to city council. And again, I think we owe that to the citizens of the city to, try to work together for the public good. So in general, I have, and I won't belabor the point I have many, well, I say many, I have several questions that were tied to that, but I think I've maybe boiled it down a little bit more in a nutshell in asking guidance as to what it is that we should focus on, because the actual ordinance itself has nothing to do with any of the particulars of the project that are much beyond the sequential processes involved in the issuance of bonds, creating the bonded indebtedness, establishing the processes of accountability. I mean, it's a pretty comprehensive ordinance, which seems to, again, be pretty well restricted to matters concerning the sale and issuance of revenue bonds, and not, trying to nuance the differences of whether this is or is not a good idea. So with that being said, I don't know if that's enough direction to give you an opportunity to respond, but I like to know what it is I'm supposed to do before I go about doing it. Make any sense.
All right, so, green, it's on. Okay, so I think that the question's a very good one. And, pardon? Oh, okay, all right, okay. So the question's a very good one about what is the scope and role of a building commission. And I'm gonna spend a couple of minutes talking about the background on why we have building commissions, just to give an overview. And it is truly mind-numbing at some levels, but I apologize for that in advance. So under the West Virginia Constitution, a local government cannot incur debt that is payable from taxes unless it has an election of the citizens. And for anything except a school bond, it must pass by 60% in order for the debt to be incurred. In 30 years, I have done that. I have done a bond issue like that exactly one time. So the West Virginia Supreme Court, and the reason is, there's a number of reasons, but the West Virginia Supreme Court has recognized that there are obligations that need to be incurred that do not qualify as debt under the Constitution. One of those, there's three categories, and one of those categories is a lease purchase obligation that is subject to annual appropriation. So building commission, the concept of the building commission was created by the legislature for the purpose of facilitating that, utilizing that category of obligation. It's an indebtedness, but not for constitutional purposes. Well, why is it not debt for constitutional purposes? Because the way that a building commission deal works is the building commission issues a bond, which is no different than borrowing money. Okay, it's no different than signing a note. Why do we call it a bond? Because the statute calls it a bond. Otherwise, we would just call it a note, just like a loan. Okay, so the building commission enters into that loan, we'll just call it that, with a bank. And then the building commission leases the property
purchases the property, then leases it to the city. Then pursuant to the lease between the building commission and the city, the loan is payable from lease payments the city makes annually. All right. So the building commission itself has no taxation authority. It has no ability to raise fees, generally has no employees. It functions as a conduit for that financing. Okay, well, why is it constitutional? Because the city can opt prior to the start of each fiscal year not to continue the lease. They can terminate the lease prior to the start of each fiscal year. And there's no recourse by the lender against the city, nor against the building commission. This is all provided for in code. So you may recall, and I know we have a couple of former legislators here, that during the Wise administration, there was an outcry about the workers' comp building where the ballpark sits now, that it was terrible, and we were going to cancel the lease. Okay, that was purchased and rehabilitated through a lease revenue bond through the state building commission. We were going to cancel the lease, not make any more payments, because legally the state had the ability to cancel the lease. True, they absolutely did. However, the rating agencies and other folks on Wall Street called the governor's office and said, you might want to reconsider that, because yes, legally you can terminate that lease and whoever purchased that bond's on the hook, but you'll never borrow money again for a long time. So while the city has the ability to terminate the lease, there are repercussions clearly from doing that. So that's a background on building commissions, why they exist, what the role, what the primary role is, et cetera. So when you look at the code section, and I understand your point on 816, and I'll discuss that in a moment, but we've had this issue arise multiple times of what is the role of the building commission in situations that were far uglier than anything that's occurred here. And the bottom line is, our firm and every other bond counsel firm that I know of, we take the position that since you are a appointed body, delegated, appointed by the city and delegated, authority, the building commission acts independent of what city council does. Now, is that good? Is it bad? That's in your, eye of the beholder, but you're a public corporation and you're appointed to the position. So there's no, other than what's not provided for in the statute, there's no prohibition on what you do, nor is it required that you do anything. I've had projects where the city council or the county commission approved building the courthouse annex and the building commission said no, and it didn't get built. That was in Ritchie County. So that, and frankly, they didn't approve it because the bids came in too high, came in at $12 million, and the folks on the building commission said, no, it's too expensive. We don't need a building that's that expensive. So it's, in my legal opinion, professional opinion is, and I would say this, and I've said it on the record many times, is that just like any other, it's like the sanitary board. Okay, the sanitary board in the city of Oak Hill has the statutory obligation to operate and maintain the sewer system. So if the city says, well, you should hire this person to be on to do work on the system, and the sanitary board says no, that's the purview of the sanitary board. So to me, that's very similar. And with respect to J and 816, 816 and governing body. So the actual process, the hearings and publications, et cetera, related to the bond issue are contained in 816. So when it defines the the bond issue, or excuse me, it defines governing body. The statute uses 816 uses the term governing body. So that like 816 is utilized to do, say, parking revenue bonds. There's no specific statute out there for parking revenue bonds. You can do parking revenue bonds under 816. So you'll notice that it also refers to certain provisions of 816, 7, 10, 12, 16. Those are, and well, it's 12 there. Those are the sections that talk about issuing bonds.
Yeah.
So that's where that caveat or qualifier comes from, is it's referencing that specific act. Now, I certainly people can disagree.
Right.
But-
Let me just ask, I guess in follow up to that, absent the need for a bond, let's just say the city was sitting on top of a golden egg and wanted to go out and slap the cash down and acquire a facility. That would not require action by a building commission, or is that which activates the need for involvement in the building commission predicated on the fact that this needs to be a financing
Yes.
through revenue bonds?
Absolutely. The
So
city-
there's a nexus between the need for revenue bonds and engaging the power and authority of a building commission.
Oh, it's a predicate. There
Yeah.
would be, I mean, you could use a building commission to acquire. In fact, we were talking about that, but in order to do financing, you must use building commission.
Okay. And again, I heard the word conduit. That's kind of term that I like to simplify things, that I understand. And again, trying to, sync the ordinance that it will be under review and consideration by the building commission itself. That all seems to be pretty well revenue bond sale related, which again, I think further led me to believe that we need to, have a clearer understanding of the scope of our authority, and I have, I guess, another question that may or may not be appropriate. When you start reading the statute, sometimes a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. I couldn't help but notice in 833.3, as it related to the establishment of the, I guess, intergovernmental relations building commissions, authority vested in a board. The statute specifically says in the case of a municipal building commission, the board shall consist of not less than 3 nor more than 5 members. I didn't know, I sort of figured out this was a 3-person board when I walked in the door at the first meeting. I've had some experience on boards and committees over the years, and a 3-person committee is probably my least favorite body to be a part of. I mean, for example, if I went into my friend Don Williams Cafe and got a cup of coffee and a donut, and he came over and had a seat, de facto, I feel as if I'd be in violation of the West Virginia Open Meetings Act.
Yeah, the Fayette County Board of Education case.
Yeah. And, is a matter of common sense with the level of complexity of some of this, sometimes another set of eyes and that kind of thing. And maybe the boat has sailed and, the die is cast, and, we ride this horse to hell and back, irregardless of my opinion one way or the other. But, I would just think the city, as a matter of principle, should give a little thought about something this meaty, become a little bit more robust, and you'd have a little more diversity with respect to views and opinions if you had a 5-person board as opposed to 3. And, but I think if we undertake action this evening to approve the first reading of an ordinance, that vote will have sailed. So I
Whose
Well-
decision would that be? The city council, or would that be?
Whether to appoint 2 more
to add
members.
More members or not?
Well, your ordinance creating the building commission does provide for 5 members. Okay, through having 3 members and having 3 members present provides a quorum. So you can act as with a quorum. It is certainly within the authority and judgment of the building commission that if you say, look, we'd like for the city council to consider appointing 2 more members, and you could table the motion, you could consider the motion, pass, deny, whatever you want to do, the supplemental, or like I said, you could table it, but any of those things, and you can say, well, before we meet again, we'd like for city council to consider appointing 2 more members, or we would like for city council to appoint 2 more members. That would be our request.
Well, and again, I don't want my expression here to be misinterpreted as with some nefarious, meaning or anything. It just, as a matter of principle, it just seems that 3 lay persons walking in off the street, picking up, municipal bonding authority is a little bit of a lift if you take it seriously. And I just think there's a lot to be gained as far as diversity of, I'm not saying you'd have to have a particular skill set to be a meaningful member of a building commission, but it's an opportunity to have a little bit more robust consideration going into something. And I'm not saying that being derogatory toward any of our current members, but I just feel a little bit light up here for some reason.
Let me, those are all very valid points. I mean, certainly that's entirely within the decision of the building commission. I will tell you that it is not uncommon, and indeed it's very common to have a building commission where you don't have every member appointed. So I don't want anyone to get the idea that because we're at that point right now, and we've got 2 open slots, that is in some way a rare occurrence or out of the normal, because frankly, building commissions are generally utilized fairly rarely. So it's very typical to have openings or have folks that need to be reappointed. So, but to your point, if the will of the building commission is to table the motion and ask city council, say, we would like to have 2 more members appointed, that's within the purview of the building commission.
Well, I'd ask Demita, I guess, would be I don't really have a true understanding as to the timeline. And I mean, I don't want to, derail or mess up a finely calibrated schedule of, this needs to be done, this. And I don't have a sense of that, but is this on a timeline that going back to council with a recommendation to increase the composition? of the
I
building
think
committee?
we're behind already, so it won't hurt it any.
Well, I was under the impression we had to do this before the last council meeting.
Well,
That
that was
obviously wasn't.
the original plan, but it's okay for them to have their 3rd reading after council.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's fine. I mean, the only reason we had you all before city council was because I suggested it. It's not a requirement at all. And in fact, your ordinance infers that council, and I didn't know that at the time, but your ordinance infers that city council needs to take action first, which is interesting. I'm not sure where that came from.
Which
but
they
It's in
did.
there.
Yeah,
So, right.
council's on their 2nd reading.
Correct. So that's been covered. But as far as timeline, the only timeline that, and I don't know the answer to this, is if there's a timeline to actually acquire the property within a certain period of time. Other than that, it's really up to, it's just when we get finished with the process.
and I'm not a veteran of chairing meetings, but I probably should have introduced, we do have the third member the Bill was talking about over Zoom. Dave Stewart is, you can hear us? You heard?
Yes, sir.
I didn't know if you had anything to throw in there.
Well, everything that Mr. Laird was talking about was pretty much on point with what I was I've been through this process before with the police department. I was on the building committee for it. Now, as far as if we were to table this, as Mr. Laird brought up there, would that start our first reading over if we get 2 more members then?
Yes, you'd have your first reading once whenever you decided to put out an agenda and schedule a meeting.
Okay.
Simply, then you would have your first meeting. Whoever was appointed as members would be sworn in and attend the meeting. So we would go from 3 to 5 members. But that could be as rapidly as city council but chooses 2 more members.
Okay. All right.
Or chooses not to have 2 more members.
Correct. Yes,
So
sir.
that appointment authority would reside strictly with council.
That's right.
The best we could do is recommend the increase in the composition of the building commission from 3 to 5 members.
That's correct. Absolutely. It's a request. That's it. City council can say no. They're independent too.
Now, how would the selection process go about then?
That's up to city council.
Okay.
I mean, they would follow the procedure they follow for other boards would be my strong suggestion.
Okay.
You follow whatever procedure you use for uncompensated, public servants to serve
Yes,
on
sir.
boards. That's basically
I
what you
understand.
do.
I do
Normally-
have another question real quick. Who all's in attendance? Because all I can see is the back of people's heads right now.
We have our Counselor Perry and Kevin Willis, a business owner, Jim Ayers, who is also a business owner, Michelle Reiser, who is a citizen, Mike Fox, who is a former council person, and Tom Oxley, who is on council now, John Garvin, who is a resident of Oak Hill, Krista Hodges, who is on council, and Chris Gill, who's on the fire department. Did I miss
Okay.
anyone?
Good job.
No. Mhm.
I was just curious who all was present. I appreciate that, Demita.
You're welcome. And normally, when we appoint committees, council will nominate people and they will take a vote on it. We usually have to look for people, so usually we only have one person.
People aren't lining up.
No one's lining up to be on the committee.
There are, for reasons that I don't understand, will probably never know, the building commission statute does have limitations on the composition of the board, which are really probably the most stringent in the state code next to the investment management board. So you have no more than 2/3 of the total number of members shall be from the same political party. And no member of such board shall hold any office other than the office of notary public or employment under the United States of America, the state of West Virginia, any county or political subdivision of, or any political party. All members shall be residents of the municipality or county for which appointed, and no member shall be compensated. So it does, I mean, if you're a state, federal employee, county, municipal employee, or employed by a political party, you're not permitted to be on the building commission. And,
Okay.
So I offer that only because by definition, that eliminates a percentage, fairly reasonable percentage of potential folks, but that's the only limitation. And otherwise it's however the city typically appoints board members.
Now we have a Republican, a Democrat, and an independent on the board.
Perfect parity and
Yes.
balance. I felt balance.
Yeah, I knew we don't want to rock the boat with that. No.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I brought the topic up. I'll express my opinion, but it's opinion only. It kind of reminds me of loading the station wagon before the trip to California, and maybe you've left a kid on the front porch. This boat's about to sail, and I guess in my mind, I'm trying to decide what benefit could be derived by a little bit more of a meaty commission as opposed to a three-person. Sometimes you want the speedboat and sometimes you want the Queen Mary, but I'm looking for something in between. I think there could be some benefit to this in addition to maybe another day or two of study time. I think there's some benefit in seeing if council would indeed consider making this a 5 as opposed to 3-person board, because I think we could be a little bit more deliberative and balanced in our scrutiny as to our duties and responsibilities. And I don't think, from what I hear, we would lose great ground by making this. Believe I have several other questions that I'd like to get to, since we've got I don't want to waste time because we got a pretty valuable resource in the room, but I think we could all benefit from the further discussion and informational part of this, but I don't feel an overwhelming need to undertake action with respect to the approval of a first reading this evening, which would give us time to see if council would consider the possibility of additional membership on this commission. So that's my obvious preference, but I'm but one of 3.
I guess I'm still confused. How far behind would this put? You say we're already behind. So what, can you
Is there-
explain where we're at and where the council's at? in the
Council's
process?
on their second reading, and then we will have, we need one more reading and a public hearing.
But
And
then Demeet is correct. That is the schedule for the council. The schedule for the building commission is a first reading, a second reading have to be separated by at least 1 week. And then you have a third and final reading with a public hearing immediately, prior to the third and final reading. And you have to publish notice of that public hearing as legal ads. So taking all that into account, that we're saying all that, there is no requirement that they run simultaneously. There's no requirement that they run, they could run linearly. I mean, you could do the entire city and then the county, or excuse me, the building commission. And it's also worth noting that the ordinance process there's actually going to be 4 steps in this for each entity. You have 3 readings, 2 readings, public hearing, third reading. And then before we actually close on the financing, in order to have proposals from banks and have that all locked down, there'll be supplemental resolutions, which will be subject to 1 reading, and there'll be 1 for each entity. That'll be taken care of prior to closing. So within a week or 2 of the actual closing date, those actions will be taken by the building commission and the city. So it's a 4-step process. Delaying your first reading here does not in any way, shape, or form jeopardize what the city's done. It simply means that you're going to wait to take that action until you schedule another meeting, whether that's when the city appoints 2 new members or before they appoint 2 new members. That's up to the members of the building commission.
So will city council, they'll have, the next meeting will be the second reading. And then,
the next meeting, well, I'm not sure if we have the time to publish the hearing.
No, we don't. No.
So the next, it will be in September,
so the second reading won't be till September anyway.
the third reading, and public hearing will be in
So that's
September.
what I'm-
So you have you could possibly finish it and have your hearing in
Well, but if we wait for council
September.
to appoint 2 new members, that would be the next council meeting.
Well, we
correct.
have to have a special meeting at the end of July for a budget revision. So they could take it up then if they wish to.
Did you have more questions before we go? It would be good to cover.
Yeah, I've got.
You're pretty
some-
in depth, I know. So
Well,
it's good.
I don't.
Now, I do have a question. You were saying there that the third meeting or the third reading of this and the public hearing, are those going to take place at the same meeting?
Generally, they do. What happens is the public hearing occurs at the same meeting as the third reading. So you hold the public hearing and you have the third reading at the same meeting, immediately thereafter. It's not required. You just have to have the public hearing before you have the third reading. So
Okay,
you could separate the public hearing and the third reading by a week, 2 weeks, a month. I've had that occur where a public hearing occurred and the public came out and said, we got a problem with this. In fact, that was the Ritchie County situation. And building commission said, we're going to table this for 2 weeks, think about it, came back and then took action. So
okay. Now, I was listening in on the Monday night meeting from the 11th. And a couple things were mentioned about the building committee and were said that it was almost as if we were like another city council mirroring them of some sort, I guess. What authority, and I know you've kind of answered this in a way, but what authority does the building committee have? If that was brought up in that meeting?
sure. Well, your authority comes from the state code. And as Mr. Laird said, it goes through and it talks about the authority of the building commission, which includes acquisition of property, sale of property, issuance of bonds, leasing of property, receiving grants, donations, et cetera. I mean, there's a list of items A through J or K, actually through LMNO, of powers of the building commission. I think that while that's certainly important and it does give the context, I think that the focus should be on the fact that you're appointed as members to a public corporation to exercise your own judgment. And again, I draw the comparison to the sanitary board. Sanitary board is provided with broad powers related to the sanitary board, and city council is, except for the fact of raising rates, condemnations, and issuing bonds, city council does not have the authority to tell a board member what to do. And maybe that's because the legislature thought that the building commission should be independent because you're issuing bonds and going into taking on this obligation. Maybe they didn't think about it. I don't know. But the bottom line is, I don't think you can be appointed to a board and then told you can't exercise your authority, your independent decision making. Now, whether you look at it as, well, we're not going to issue the bonds because I'm not going to authorize issuing the bond because I don't believe this is an appropriate project for the city, or I just don't believe it's an appropriate project. That's a distinction, I think, without a difference, but you can view it as part of the act of issuing the bonds. So that's my take on it. My 3 partners agree with me on it, and I've always taken this position. And frankly, for me to take any other position would be contrary to multiple hearings that I've been recorded at. So I think as an independent board, you have to have that authority to then make those decisions.
Okay. Now, whenever we do vote on this, how does the vote not how does it have to go, but does it have to be a unanimous vote? Does it have to be, how's that going to go?
It has to be, each vote would have to be a majority. You have to have a quorum first.
Yes,
of
sir.
all. Okay, so you have 5 members, 3 members are quorum. And then so at each meeting, you have to have a quorum. And then at each meeting, you have to have a vote of the members, and the majority of the members present would have to vote yay or, would have to vote yes or no. And if they vote yes, then it passes, whichever step that is in the process. If it dies at the final resolution, the supplemental resolution, it dies. I mean, it's a 4-step process. So no action that's taken at any step along the way is final as far as approving something. Now you kill it at the 3rd reading, then you're done. So,
Yes, sir.
it just requires a majority vote of the quorum of the members present.
Okay. Thank you.
Certainly.
Do we want to get into questions, or do we want to resolve the composition question? I guess that's where we find ourselves.
Can I ask one question real quick?
Sure.
I know you had brought up something about going into Cafe 110 and, having coffee or whatever and having something said. How does that work as far as like, if I wanted to meet with Mr. Laird and Mr. Williams, because I work out of town all week, so that's why I'm having to zoom in. If it was something that maybe I could meet up with both of them on a Saturday or something like that, would that be possible, or is that against code? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question. And under the West Virginia Sunshine Law, all meetings of public bodies must occur in an open meeting that is noticed and posted and is available and open to the public. Now, so sitting down at the local coffee shop or exchanging emails about what do you think about this, what do you think about that, is a problem. Now you can exchange emails and saying, well, I'd like for us to put this on the agenda for next Tuesday, this item. So for scheduling purposes, you can certainly just talk. But if you're deliberating in any way towards the final answer or towards a decision, then that is a violation of the Open Government Proceedings Act, called again, the Sunshine Law. So
Yes, sir.
Is that if just 2 people are talking, or if a majority of
it's actually 2. Yeah,
which 2 would be a majority for us?
right.
But if you had a 5-person meeting, I could drink coffee at Don Williams and have a donut without appearing as if I'm violating the open meetings.
Right. That's right.
Okay.
No, that's right. That does come out of the Fayetteville Board of Education case, because there was a claim about that at a football game, as I recall.
I seem to recall that.
Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering, because I know Mr. Williams, just who he is and everything, but Mr. Laird I'm unfamiliar with, so I just wanted to kind of get to know him and didn't want to cause any concern or issues.
Well, and so long as you're not discussing, and that was the point of the Supreme Court case that we're laughing about, is, a couple of folks on the Board of Education, this was during consolidation, a couple of folks on the Board of Education were sitting together at a football game, and there was an allegation made that they were talking about, school board matters. Well, so long as you're not talking about anything related to the building commission, you can go have coffee. It's no problem. It's just, you can't sit and deliberate about what the response is going to be. And the one that always catches people and creates just horrible situations is emails. And you see these, and you hear this, you're like, well, we can't have a meeting, so we'll just email around, see what everybody thinks and make a decision. No, it doesn't. And I hear that all the time, but it doesn't work that way.
Right.
Can't do that again, other than scheduling a meeting. So,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
Okay.
Again, I don't know how you gentlemen feel about this issue. I've explained my preference with respect to, if it doesn't appear to have an adverse impact on the project or our consideration of it. My preference would be to see if we could get a little supplement to our membership here, but I don't know if I'm a voice of one here, if anybody agrees with me or not.
You can make a motion to table the consideration of the bond ordinance and to ask council to appoint 2 more members.
But now while we have him here, should we cover anything else that might be?
Oh, yeah, so
You wanna cover
we'll
it?
hold that issue in abeyance till the conclusion of the
That's-
rest of the questions,
that
and
can
then
be
we can
however
take
it
that up
is.
at that time. I have attempted to plow through in anticipation of you being here tonight, the bond authorizing ordinance itself,
Mhm.
which is
Mind numbing.
yeah,
Yeah.
I had
It is.
It was a walk away document for me. I had to read it incrementally. And again, there were no numbers on the pages, so it's a little hard to. I had a professor that said, "Mr. Laird, you need to paginate," and I didn't know what paginate was, which is to number sequentially. But we have no sequential numbers here. But on page 2 of the document itself, just a couple of questions. This kind of reads as I refer to it as a preamble, but it would be in the third whereas coming down, beginning with the issuer under the act. We're to provide for the rights of bondholders and as a means to secure this indebtedness and obligation, we are to give any security deemed necessary and advisable in exercising the authority to issue these bonds is, I guess, the way I would summarize that language. Is the security contemplated in this project, the 1% sales tax revenue to be collected by the city as I guess what's been referred to me somewhat as a dedicated revenue source. But then I read back into this, and based on what you said concerning the rent revenues, it appears to me that the bonded indebtedness is actually going to be secured as a result of the rent revenue resulting from the lease of the building to the city and may not necessarily directly flow from the 1% sales tax, if any of that makes any sense.
Yep, absolutely makes
It's a little scary when it starts making some sense to me.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent, that's very, very, very astute reading. It's because it is complicated. It's very dense. This is not a pledge of the sales tax. Okay, there are no revenues that are directly pledged for this bond issue. If we were doing that, we would be under 816 fully or another statute under state law,
Right.
like sewer revenues, for example. In this instance, the city is obligated to make, subject to appropriation, the city is obligated to make the lease payments from whatever revenues are available. Now, they can't raise taxes. There are no taxes pledged. So it's the general revenue fund that is making the lease payments.
Okay.
But there's no, and the banks understand this. They understand the nature of this type of financing. They understand that there's that ability to terminate the lease and that there's some risk, so to speak. But
in the city, making their decision concerning this project, obviously they, the rent that will be paid, which will be used for purposes of the bringing that into the actual bond process itself. The discussions that I've heard relate to anticipated additional revenues through the 1% sales tax. I've not followed any of this contemporaneously on YouTube or anything else. So, and I'll use reveal what I'm thinking about. My experience as it relates to regional jails, for example. Those facilities were constructed based on projected per diems. And if you start messing with, we need to help the counties and bring per diems down. And the next thing you know, somebody's from the regional jail authority is screaming, well, that will disrupt our bonds and create a refinancing disaster. And is there a need when you have a bonded project to be secure with respect to, at least recognizing here's a revenue stream that's related to this project, and we need not use that to fund other projects until this is taken care of, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just like at home. I mean, your car loan is secured by your car, but you want to make sure you're able to pay for it.
Right.
And it's not taken from everything else. So yes, it's absolutely correct. I mean, just because the bank doesn't have a direct lien on the tax revenue coming in from the 1% sales tax doesn't mean that it's not, that it's not considered part of the overall budget of the city. I mean, DeMita is going to take if this bond is issued, DeMita is going to take the budget of the city and say, okay, we've got police and everything else. And then, oh, by the way, we have this payment on an annual basis that has to be paid as a lease rental for the new city hall.
Right. And so that's a matter internal to the city finances and not within the purview of the building commission. I mean,
Correct.
we don't get into any of that. Okay.
Yeah, correct.
I didn't mean to go down
No.
that rabbit hole, but it seemed to suggest a question there somewhere. Again, on that same page of the preamble, another two whereases down beginning the issuer desires for the city to undertake. The building commission appears to assign the city all duties and responsibilities related to the requisitioning and application of the proceeds of the bond for the project of the cost incurred by the project. Is it clear that the bond revenue will be used only for those expenditures directly related to this public works project? And I guess I'm thinking about monitoring what is and is not a legitimate expenditure under the terms and conditions of the bond, because I imagine you'll have a lot of indirect expenses related to the movement of IT equipment and cables and other stuff that go, you get into site prep and a bunch of other non-directly related, some things, at least in my mind, in monitoring expenditures and whether something is or isn't an appropriate expenditure depends on how pliable your definition is to what is a legitimate indirect expenditure. Is that the kind of thing that will, again, be specific only to the internal finances of the city? Or is that anything the building commission needs to be concerned about? Because I guess you want to make sure with respect to this category of public funds that they are expended in accordance with that which is strictly within the confines of the project and the project only, and doesn't end up in some other part of city finances.
Mhm.
That's why you have a smart person like Danita in charge. Why maybe an idiot like me shouldn't be asking the question, but are those ever issues about what you can and can't spend bond monies for?
Yes, it is. Under state code 833 and under IRS, these bonds will be tax exempt. So what does that mean? That means that if I bought the bond of the Oak Hill Building Commission, I would not pay federal or state income tax on the bond issue. Okay, why is that important? That means since I'm not paying tax on the interest I receive, I will give you a lower rate of interest. Generally, it's about 20%. 20, well, it depends, 20 to 30%. Depends on what your tax bracket is. So for a bank, it's generally about 21 to 25% below what they would do for a private entity where they're paying tax on that interest. Well, the Internal Revenue Service views that as a subsidy. They hate tax exempt bonds. So they have a whole list of rules, lots of rules about tax exempt bonds. And one of them is you can't pay operating revenues except for very limited circumstances. State code doesn't provide anything to pay operating revenues. So for example, you're not going to pay your electric bill or your gas bill or your water bill over at the new city hall. You would only pay for what I would call capital improvements, things like construction, anything that can be capitalized is a good way to look at it. So your construction, your design fees, your hard costs such as your cables, your materials, your supplies, that sort of thing. Any testing that might need done. Can you pay for your move? I don't know, Demita, can you capitalize a move? Probably. I think you can. Depends on which.
How much it costs.
Depends on which accountant you have. 2 + 2 can equal whatever you want it to if you find the right accountant. So there will be certainly limitations on it. And I think that probably most importantly, the process to pull those monies down. I mean, it's not going to be out of a single checkbook with a single signatory. No, there's no disrespect to Demita, but it's going to be, city council is going to approve a requisition every month that has the invoices attached to it, as will the building commission. And so the way this will work, at least as I see it, is let's say that a bond is issued for $1.5 million. Well, at closing, you're going to pay the costs associated with the acquisition of the building. That happens on the day of closing. So the day you close the bond issue, you pay the costs associated with the building. Hopefully, you can get a drawdown bond. So in other words, you're not pulling the full 1.5 million down at closing. You're just pulling down the amount that's needed, and then you pull down additional amounts as time goes on. Then as you do the design and other work that's necessary for whatever renovations are going to occur or repairs and that sort of thing, you would draw those monies down on a monthly basis to cover those expenses.
Okay.
But it's a lot like a home loan to construct a house, a home construction loan. The way I would.
Yeah. So engineering fees, architectural fees, even though those could have been pre-project, they can be post-bond expenditures posted against them.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay.
We often do that actually for water and sewer systems, where we'll do an initial borrowing to help pay those costs. And then the final borrowing will pay the construction costs.
Right. Chairman, should I continue on with some questions? I don't, these may be strictly for an audience of one, but I read this pretty carefully. I would have benefit from a little clarification if you allow
If you
me.
think it's important.
Well,
I thought you were going a little long there, but it was after you asked it, it was very legitimate question. That's good.
the next or the bottom whereas the following documents, those are supplemental resolutions that are further enumerated on the those pages, of which I don't believe currently exist in written form.
They don't.
Will those ultimately be those supplemental matters, the 5 additional documents specified as supplemental to the ordinance? Will those be published and available for review before adoption of the ordinance, or
It probably not before the adoption of the ordinance or the enactment of the ordinance. We can, if you would like for us to, we can do that. And the only reason I say probably not is because depending upon what bank is the low bidder or offers the best interest rate, it will change the document somewhat depending upon whether the money's being given up front or the money is being provided on a drawdown basis.
Right.
But we can certainly provide you with forms. They won't be final, but we can
Yeah.
provide you with forms.
It's not as if the ordinance isn't complicated enough, but normally if you vote on an ordinance, you want to see the full text of the ordinance before you consider it, I guess. So, but in any event, going over to what I call, or I guess it's section 3 of that document, which is on page 4 of the document itself. That section implies that the bonds in the aggregate amount not to exceed $1.5 million shall be issued as either taxable or on a tax exempt basis. I assume these are going to be tax exempt bonds, and so the taxable is not. I guess that's what the concern was. I didn't know if these
Why
were.
would both be in there? It's really just flexibility. I put it in there because when I drafted the ordinance, I didn't know if there was going to be a possibility of leasing out the first floor to a business. I don't know the building. And if you get any private business use involved, I mean, if you wanted to put a cafe or wine bar or whatever on the first floor, and City Hall, it's just more convenient for the city employees. They can just leave at 4 or 5 o'clock and just go downstairs. But that's why it's just taxable. It's just, it's typical. I put it in there just for flexibility purposes. You wouldn't even have to say it's tax exempt. You wouldn't have to say anything.
Okay. The further down in that section, I guess the last paragraph in section 3 contemplates again the possibility for establishing a revenue fund, sinking fund, or similar account to facilitate the payment of the debt service, which I'm sure would be something Demita would be primarily involved in. But the term paying agent is also used, which seems to be a pretty significant sounding sort of title. Who will be the paying agent under this project? And is there any real meaning assigned to that other than the person that manages the finances here for the city?
The only reason that you would, let me step up. The only reason you would have a paying agent is typically utilized in well, let me rephrase that. A paying agent who is separate and apart from the holder of the bonds is utilized in a true public bond issue. So where, like you're talking about the jails, where the bonds are issued through an investment bank and all kinds of people own them, and you have to have somebody that receives the money and then distributes the money to the folks that hold the bonds. In this case, the bank that purchases the bonds will also be the paying agent.
Okay.
They'll be the registrar and paying agent will be the bank that
Okay,
purchases.
so
the
that
bonds.
answered my next question, is registrar.
And that's a registrar is a requirement of the Internal Revenue Service. All bonds are required to be registered, because when you hear the term bearer bonds, and you'll remember coupon bonds where you showed up with the coupons, and the IRS got rid of those in '86 because people were using them to hide money. They weren't paying tax on them. So they got rid of that whole process in '86, and now the bonds have to be registered.
Mr. Chairman, my mind can only absorb so much. These are some questions that were primarily, again, front end loaded in the front parts. This actually began to make more sense as I got toward the latter part of the document. So in kind of looking over the remainder of my questions, I think I'm pretty well satisfied that I'll be able to sleep at night now. This is
No, that answered a lot.
pretty dry and parched material. God bless you for making your living this way. There
There aren't very many of us that do it. There must be a reason.
well,
No, they're excellent questions. They are. I appreciate it. And I'm available anytime you want to call me. I'm happy to go over it. Any questions, I'll be back for subsequent meetings. I'd rather the questions get asked.
Well, and again, I think there's a tendency in technical matters, you sort of size up the room and hope there's a smart person in the room that knows what they're doing, and you just sort of do the old leap of faith and, along for the ride. But I've always had a little trouble doing that. I have to sort of try to understand something at least. And it's, so, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the floor.
I was gonna ask, Dave, did you have any other questions? that Bill didn't cover?
Nothing right now. I guess whatever Mr. Laird was suggesting there earlier about maybe tabling this to request more members added to the building committee.
Is that, so we need a motion for that, right?
Okay.
Is that the motion? We'll make that the motion.
I'll motion to table this first reading and request that the city council add on 2 more members to the building committee to help with the decision-making and process of this.
I would second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
All those, what do I say? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So I guess that covers everything then. Until we, motion to adjourn until we get word from council.
Sounds good.
Somebody make a motion?
Thank you all for coming.
I guess the same way this,
We post it out in front of, on this building. But you can call and let us know. I think it'll be after July 28th. Yes. Okay. And we'll try to put it on some of our social media. Do you have Facebook? Okay. Then,
Good for you.
yes, someone will let you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
are we,
Yes,
we are adjourned. All right.
we are adjourned. Thanks, David.